Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Honorable Moyo has already touched upon many different things that I'd like to unfold even further during our discussion today. Just to put some context, maybe I'll start with a general question. Stan, how, from you're bringing the industrial perspective here, how has the energy landscape changed in Africa, and what does that mean for an energy-intensive player like Anglo-American in this case, but in general for an energy-intensive player in terms of needs and expectations?
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to greet the Minister and my colleague, Jonas. So my perspective initially probably will come from a company perspective on the energy space. Energy costs have just escalated. When I joined the company, the price of electricity as part of your total operating costs, your cash costs, was in the single digits for a conventional mine. But now you'd find energy costs could go up to 20, 30%. In smelters, it's a lot more. It's almost all of your operating costs. And this is, it has a direct impact. It's a big part of deindustrializing a place like South Africa, is when you got runaway electricity pricing, it affects manufacturing, it affects mining, it affects processing. And those are the businesses that actually create employment. So we're sitting with that inherent and historical issue of electricity pricing. And then when you look forward and you look at environmental impacts, so it's not just carbon, but if you look at air quality, those costs are going to be internalized. So you could see the path coming forward. The power stations have to take on these costs, and they're going to have to pass those costs on. So you don't see a space where the competitiveness of your operations are looking better because of electricity. If anything, it's going to get worse. So you have to think about how do you address this? And if you look, and the Minister is absolutely right, you need to think about energy mix and a balance that ensures security of supply. You can't get away from that. But how do you improve your competitiveness? And the other change in the landscape is the cost of renewable technologies. When you look at the South African REAP rounds, and you look at what PV and wind came in at, and you look at those prices now, they're substantially reduced. You look at battery energy storage, that's just come off even in this year. So the cost of energy could be ameliorated by taking up renewables. And then when you look at what are the renewable resources in Southern Africa, or even generally more in Africa, there's phenomenal wind resources, there's phenomenal PV resources, probably amongst the best resource capacities globally. So how do you bring those resources at lower cost to have a bearing on your operating cost? And that, for us, is the opportunity and the change in the landscape that we see coming our way. And so at Anglo-American, we decided to actually act on it. And we set up a JV and a company called Envusa Energy to develop renewable resources. And it solves a few of those problems. It solves the issue of cost of electricity. It solves the issue of carbon and compliance costs going forward. Helps with environmental impacts. And we think it gives us a competitive edge for our products in the market space going forward. So it ticks a lot of the boxes, but you have to think about it overall in terms of security of supply as well. And so, I think the energy landscape is fundamentally changed because of this, but it requires a new way of thinking, and it requires a new way of how you understand planning for energy. You can't just think of energy as I've got a PV project and I've got an off-taker and I've got a contract, right? You have to think about ecosystems. How do I bring multiple sources of energy into multiple off-takers that brings down the overall cost of energy and gives us this mix that we need? And so I think the landscape's changed, it's fundamentally different, and it's time for us in Africa to actually realize that, and it presents a lot more opportunity than passively letting it happen to us, right? The digital age, the AI age, are all phenomenal opportunities based on renewables. And so this energy transition opens up a new path for industrializing Africa in a very, very different way, and we need to seize it as an opportunity rather than saying, yes, we're anchoring down with fossil fuels, but there's a massive opportunity for us to do something differently, and we need to grab it.
Thanks. Honorable Moyo, many, many challenges as well as changes. How have the industrial needs changed from your perspective? What are the demands, the requests that the industrial players come with now? Have they changed? Have they changed with the landscape as well?
Wow. Is this on?
Yes, it's working.
No, thank you very much. Industrialists want security of supply. And in the changing world that we are living in, particularly here in Southern Africa, and I'm sure it's across the continent, that reliability coming from our utilities is not assured. And therefore, industrialists have now tried to find ways of securing their energy supply. And in the case of Zimbabwe, they have adopted several strategies. One is to partner with the energy producers, because we have allowed in our regulations independent power producers who can supply to the grid. That's one avenue, pathway. But the other pathway is an independent power producer can actually couple with an industrial plant and supply directly by wheeling power through the grid. And that is the first thing. The second thing is a lot of these companies also want to reduce their carbon print. They are producing goods that must be traded on the international market, and the international market is pressurizing Africa, as I have said, to reduce the carbon print, although we are not the major emitters. But they know that in the international market, if they couple with renewables, that will give them advantage of their products. So we are seeing companies in Zimbabwe who not only are getting electricity from thermal-induced productions, who are coupling with their own solar systems as captive market. And this captive market with the solar are also allowed to, if they have access, to sell to the grid. So they have both ways. They are coupling and they are producing their own solar. I have commissioned, in the few months, I have commissioned 2 major solar systems of companies that are already getting electricity from the grid, but they now use solar. One of them is an international company with bases here in South Africa. They have produced 35 megawatts of solar, and they are going for another 45 megawatts, and the ultimate is over 100 megawatts of their own, and yet they are linked to the grid. When they have lockdowns for maintenance, they sell everything to the grid. So the country also gains. So in our balance of power balance, we now account not only what is produced by the national grid, which relies the national utility, which relies on thermal and big hydro, but we are now accounting for those who are captive power producers and independent power producers. And I must say, the independent power producers are moving more to renewables than going to thermal. There are some who are doing thermal. And I know of companies just at the border or with South Africa. The company is producing coal, the company is doing ferrochrome, and They've now put their own thermal plant, and they are looking at supplying the grid in Zimbabwe, but they've had contacts with companies in South Africa, where once they consummate that contract, all they need is willing power from Zimbabwe and from South Africa to supply a particular company here in South Africa. So companies are doing this, and we think that the regulatory frameworks that we have created in the region, coupled with the Southern African Power Pool, which is able to do marketing for us, whether it's a day-ahead marketing or contractual marketing, this is now possible. So industrial production should not now be based on what Zimbabwe produces, but also what other regions, what the countries in the region are producing. Absolutely,
thank you. It is in fact difficult. There is the decarbonization need. It's on the table on all these industrial players, not just them. At the same time, you're highlighting how important it is to supply baseload power, which is mostly provided through thermal power. So, Jonas, what is the Namibian perspective? How have you helped industrials balance these different needs, the need for reliable and consistent supply of power together with some reliance also on sustainable energy?
Thank you very much, Silvia. In Namibia, first I think I should give the perspective of the landscape of electricity in Namibia. So currently, within the SADC region, we have a power deficit of at least 4 gigawatts. And that is quite significant. And the situation has been exacerbated by the El Nino and the drought situation in Zimbabwe and Zambia over the past 2 years. And so, although we had already a challenge with meeting up with the power demand, so Namibia relies more than 60% of its electricity from the neighbors, so imports. And then the region's power generation capacity being hydro-based, there has been a serious threat in terms of security of supplies over the past 24 months at least. In terms of then the highly energy-intensive industry in Namibia. We are primarily a mining economy country. So we introduced in 2019 what we call modified single buyer model. The objective was to open up the market for generations for the IPP as well as for power trading at the same time, to assist especially the heavy industry to have the ability to source their power outside the national utility, which is NAMPO. So with the introduction of the modified single buyer models, so it allows the industries to be able to set up their own on-site limited generation capacity, because they are only allowed to purchase around 30% of their need from elsewhere outside the utility. This is for the sustainability of the utility as well. So we have to consider that if we only allow the market to be open to independent power producers, everybody generates their own power, then we might end up closing the utility, become irrelevant. For that purpose, we introduce a cutoff of 30% of self-generations. So Namibia being endowed with abundant solar resources, so most of the the major industries, even you find even shopping malls today, they have solar panels for self-generations of power. So this is really how we in Namibia, we are helping to the industry to be able to have reliable power supply and at the same time clean energy. Because as Honorable Moyo indicated, most of the industrialists, because of the demand in decarbonizations, they are not really investing in fossil fuel-based power, but rather the renewables. So in Namibia is the ideal place because we have quite abundant solar resources, and most of the industry, they introduce solar plants around themselves. Thank you.
The importance of a regulatory framework that helps all these different solutions is clear. And one thing that Honorable Moyo mentioned was the partnership between private and public stakeholders. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how the public and private stakeholders can work together?
Well, thank you again. For the private sector, I think we have found out that clear regulatory frameworks that indicate how they can come in, and in our case, through ZIDA, the Zimbabwe Development Agency. It's a one-stop shop, and it is on the website. It tells you how you can apply. And it tells you also if whether you want to do thermal, or you want wind, or you want solar, mini hydro. It tells you how you apply for license with our regulatory authority. It tells you how you must get in touch with the grid if you want to have to send to the grid for a power purchase agreement. And it tells you also how you can contact any company. This morning, we were discussing with a company which is wanting to invest, and all they wanted is a confirmation from the utility that the nominated private sector off-takers are there, and both the contractor, the financier, and the utility, and the off-takers are agreed. They sign on. This is in our regulations. So it makes it much easier to objectively say, this is why I'm wanting to invest. Secondly, the pricing model. Our pricing model takes into account how it's a cost-reflective tariff of the utility that we did deliberately. But it is disaggregated such that we know the cost of production, whether you are producing thermal, or you are producing solar, or you are producing wind. We have done some studies. Secondly, your power purchase agreement, if you are doing your wheeling, is also known. Your transmission costs, your distribution costs. And recently, because we want to go to retail, investors also can go now into retail. There are about 600,000 households in urban areas where there's no electricity, clusters, and we want the private sector to go and invest there. They become a mini utility company. They buy bulk from the major utility company, and they reticulate in the area, and they are the collectors of revenue from the people. So that also is very, very important. Earlier on, we had concentrated on incentives for renewables. So our incentives for renewables, which are both fiscal as well as when you want to amortize your loans, or you want to buy equipment, that equipment will come duty-free, and you will have a tax holidays for X number of years. All that has been put in place so that we can attract, particularly in the renewables. So we have seen a number of applications. We now have come up with our own compact, energy compact, where we spell out all these. In addition, anybody who is in the private sector and they are thinking about de-risking, the Minister of Finance and I and the Governor of the Reserve Bank, we sign what we call the Government Project Support Authority agreement, where we spell out all this so the investor knows exactly what incentives we are giving to them. These are some of the areas which we think are necessary. But that is also dependent on the transmission. Our transmission is aged and it needs investment. So we have opened up investment in our transmission and distribution network for investment from the private sector. And these have specific investments criteria. But we also emphasize to the outside investors that the capital markets in Zimbabwe, including the foreign currency exchange rate that we have created in Victoria Falls, these are avenues where you can raise local currency and the local investments to partner with the outside investor. And there are some who have taken advantage of this. Our pension schemes, our insurance companies, as well as banks have invested and they have financed these areas. At the end of the day, we have also analyzed and say, what are the green investment policies that we need to have so that companies that invest in the renewable can access carbon credits. That all those we have done in terms of regulations, and they are available for companies as well as anyone who wants to invest in the energy sector.
Absolutely. Yeah, you need to look at the problem from far and see all the different parts of the business that you need to address to solve every single problem, because it's not just about generation, as you say, it's about also letting private and public work together, letting the power flow around the country and go and meet the demand wherever in the country it is. Stan, you're bringing to the panel the industry perspective, but also the South African perspective. So what policy changes have been introduced that helped the activity or access to power, access to reliable power, sure, and clean power? And yeah, let's start with a good note. Let's see how it helped, and then maybe we can see, sure, what else can be done.
No, thanks, Silvia. So I think, one of the things we tried to imagine was what would a rolling CapEx program look like and what will it do? And so rolling CapEx programs means you're not building just one plant, but you're building a series of renewables or storage options that support your grid. And when you've got a rolling CapEx program, you actually need to think about a policy framework that supports it. Because if you have an enabling policy program that supports a decade-long CapEx injection into energy and renewables in particular, you can start thinking about how do you look at localization. And so for investors, they need to see this demand and they need to know there's consistency in policy. So you've got a policy that's going to be in place and not withdrawn or deferred, right? So it makes that environment attractive to them. I think, coming back to your question, what did we see? When we started with our strategy, permitting of renewable generation was limited to a few megawatts, maybe 10 megawatts. But we clearly saw there was a need to change. And so did the industry. And we promoted working with industry, and government saw it as well. And government opened up the opportunity to generate renewables. It went to 10 megawatts, then 100 megawatts, and now it's totally open. And we've seen the benefit of it. And we've also seen the benefit of rooftop solar. I mean, in South Africa, we're probably close to 7 gigawatts of rooftop solar, and it helps with the grid itself. So my sense is, in the policy environment in South Africa, we've got to a good space. The Electricity Regulation Amendment Act has now created space for a market, a wholesale electricity market, which should initiate next year. And we think, with clear rules and setup and design, that will give us a fantastic opportunity to look at energy planning and pricing. Right? It brings competition, it brings efficiency, it brings the need for the private sector to work with government. The demand for energy in a South African context runs, it probably goes into trillions of rands over the next decade. Government on their own cannot do it. Right? You're gonna need to work with the private sector. And so public-private partnerships are gonna be key to it. And having clear guidance and frameworks that allow public-private partnerships in a very transparent, mandated way to operate, I think is gonna help. Because we actually need that to accelerate, and once it's implemented. The other challenge we see is on skills and the capability and capacity to work in a very different power system. Right? It's a market system where kilowatt hours or megawatt hours are monetized on an hourly basis or half-hour basis, etc. So those skills don't exist, but we need to build up that capability, because if we don't have that capacity, we will import that capacity, right? And we won't build something that's authentic, that relates to how we should set the system up in this part of the world. So I think there's a need for thinking through how do we get skills and capacity, not just South Africa, but Southern Africa, brought in, and how do we look at technology? Whether it's digital technologies to manage a network or a trading platform, AI that plays a role in it. How do we get technology transfer to happen? Right? So these technologies exist. We need access to those technologies. So there's a few things in the policy environment that needs to be looked at. And then more broadly, if we do want to go down the opportunity that exists to inject, over R1 trillion worth of capital investments, what is the cost of that capital? Right? There's a perception, and this is work that is done as part of the G20 that South Africa is hosting, and business, or the B20, developed quite a comprehensive report, I think, in looking at energy mix and just transition. And what they picked up was the cost of capital for emerging and developing economies does not necessarily relate to the perceived risk of that capital. And so we invariably paying a premium that we shouldn't be paying in some instances. And so the B20 has put out a paper, and in it, they've flagged, financial tools and mechanisms to understand what that risk is and price it correctly. So those are some of the policy changes I think we need to think about.
Yeah, it's good to see. I think that there are challenges, but there is this common understanding that those challenges can be addressed only through partnerships. And this dialogue that happens between public and private stakeholders, I think it's very, very important. One point we haven't touched upon, but it's part of the discussion we had around the grid infrastructure, that you cannot just look at generation, but you need to see how to bring that power to the demand pockets. How do you see, and maybe Jonas, you can start on the regional exchange, so how the exchange of power, the power trade, not necessarily should stay within the boundaries of a country, but they can go beyond. You're part of the SAP. So how do you think the regional trade can help industrial players also get access to that power?
Thanks. I think first with the SAPB, that is a very important platform for power trading within the SADC regions. And it's already facilitating and enabling countries like ourselves who rely on import to move power easier from one country to another. But in terms of now investment, as I said earlier, that we currently have a deficit of in excess of 4 gigawatts within the SADC region, and this need to be addressed. The Southern African Power Pool is a good platform for power trading and energy sharing, but I think the really main issue is generation. We need now, as the SADC, to coordinate our energy generation projects. Energy planning have to be an implementation, because planning, I think we are so far good, but when it's come to the implementations of energy generation projects, as a region, then this is where we need to work together closely so that it's enable the investment. For instance, Namibian demand could be smaller on its own, but if you end the demand in Zambia and in Zimbabwe, then you have a viable project, let me say, of a power plant of 800 megawatts. Because what we need today is base load or dispatchable power in the region. Solar, we have abundant solar, but we need a backbone on which the solar can be rolled out further. And that is what we are lacking, is investment in conventional power generation. So, but for that to happen, as a region, we have now to work together in energy planning, such that investment in bigger power plants become viable. We shouldn't look at investment at national level. And that's what we have been doing. For instance, we have actually, before I move to that one, we have then, as a region, we have to look at the sources we have of energy. We have the renewables, we have potential nuclear, because Namibia is a uranium producer, and we have natural gas. So as a region, we have the Regional Gas Master Plan, for instance, which we passed in 2023, which was adopted. But today, we haven't really implemented that Regional Gas Master Plan. And gas would play a critical role in energy generation and energy integrations for the regions. So these are some of the things, as the region, we really need to move beyond planning, and when it comes to implementation, to interact. And finally, on the energy trading, Angola has good hydro, and it hasn't been affected, for instance, by the recent droughts. So its power generation capacity remains relatively good compared to others. But because Angola, for instance, is not connected to the SAPP, it's not part of, at least we don't have interconnector between Namibia and Angola. So it has become difficult right now. Angola has surplus power, but we cannot trade. But at least we are in the process now of integrating with Angola into the SAPP, such that electron can flow from the north up to the south. Yeah. So we hope in the next 2 years we will have then a fully integrated regions in terms of the energy networks, which will really facilitate energy trading much further.
Honorable Moyo, would you like to add your opinion around, or your comments around regional trade and how that can help power? Yeah.
Wow. We are in Cape Town, and less than a year after South Africa had its democratic elections, we created the Southern African Power Pool here in Cape Town in April 1995. The significance of that was we all knew at that time South Africa had excess capacity of something like 15,000 megawatts. And we were struggling in Zimbabwe, Botswana wanted some, Lesotho, Eswatini, and everyone. So we thought, let's create this power pool. It so happens now is the oldest power pool in the whole of Africa. And I think also in terms of marketing, it's a little bit more advanced than the Eastern African Power Pool or the Central African Power Pool or the Western African Power Pool and the Northern African Power Pool. But what is happening right now in terms of that development is, as he says, with the interconnector between Angola and Namibia and the interconnector that is being planned between Angola and DRC in the Katanga region, that will complete that western interconnector. Then there is the interconnector that is coming from Tanzania. The Tanzanian side has developed very well. The Zambian side is lagging behind, but that interconnector will be completed. The interconnector between Malawi and Mozambique is almost there also. So that means continental SADC will be interconnected. But because Tanzania is interconnected to the East African Power Pool, which reaches Egypt, that means that corridor can interconnect all the way to Cairo. And the vision of Cape to Cairo will be completed. The interconnector between DRC and the Central African Power Pool is also there. And the Central African Power Pool is interconnected to the Western African Power Pool. So vision of Africa 2063 can also be completed. And when you look at that industrially and commercially as the market for energy, and energy being the driver, then you are also looking at industrialization and commerce in Africa being accelerated. But having said that, in the Southern African Power Pool, there is still a lot of strengthening of existing infrastructure, transmissions, and that's why there is a desire to have what we call Sizabona, which is Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. That interconnector is possible. And on the Zimbabwean side, we need about 27 million to strengthen that, and Zambia is even shorter. So I think each country can actually strengthen that. Then we have the interconnector that is coming, which we need to strengthen from Mozambique, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Mm-hmm. That is important to evacuate what we believe is the excess capacity that is generated in Mozambique, and given the gas and hydro that is in Mozambique is a very good market for us to look at it. But there are internal transmission and distribution lines that also need to be strengthened in all the countries so that we can trade very well. And I can say the crisis that we have been faced with, the northern part of Southern Africa is hydro-based, while the southern part is more thermal-based. But we all share the God-given sun. So solar, wind, and other can be found in all the countries as renewables. But the major base load sources of hydro and thermal, these are well distributed among us. So if the economies of Southern Africa and Africa are going to grow, energy is very important, and these interconnectors are very important.
It's interesting, actually, because this is a good segue to the next panel, which is we'll be talking about regional trade and power trade. So I think you warmed up the audience to the next discussion. Thank you, Minister. Let's see if there is any question from the audience before we wrap up. If there is, there should be a mic going around. No? So maybe one last question. I will go around the panel and ask. We've started the discussion talking about the changes that have been happening so far and how those changes are affecting the industrial needs. Now, how do you see the energy landscape going forward from each of your perspective? Maybe we can start from Stan, from the industry, and then see how do you think that in the next few years the energy landscape in Africa will change, and how that is going to be impacting your operations and
thanks,
work.
Silvia. Sure. I mean, look, Africa is home to a significant portion of critical minerals. I mean, if you look at manganese, cobalt, 48% of those reserves sit in Africa. The majority of PGM reserves sit in Africa. So the world's after critical minerals. We got a portion of those critical minerals, and the challenge is going to be, how do we look at those critical minerals with our own interests? Right? Do we export ore, or do we beneficiate? And if we start to think about beneficiation, and it has to be competitive. You can't beneficiate for the sake of beneficiating, but how do you make this competitive? If you started going down that value chain and you start to unlock bigger demand for energy. And what demand does, it actually anchors generation. When people look at a life of mine or a manufacturing facility, they look at 15, 20 plus years, which means you can invest in generation and you've got an off-taker. And when you start looking at a way where Africa can work together with an integrated grid infrastructure, we're sourcing alternative forms of energy to ensure these products are competitively priced, we start to see an opportunity to change fundamentally industrialization. But we're going to have to think in an integrated way. We're going to have to think in terms of systems and ecosystems in the way we plan. And we have to think about being competitive. But if you put those things together, in my mind, we've got a fantastic opportunity to reindustrialize.
Absolutely. Minister, how do you see the energy landscape going forward, and how can we make the life easier for industrials and also for the economic growth of the countries in Africa?
Wow. Let me touch on one thing which we have not discussed about. We must make our utilities, which are existing, become strong and with cost-reflective tariffs. And those cost-reflective tariffs can be nominated, but if you don't have policies to make sure that people pay, that creates a problem. In Zimbabwe, we have now said everyone is on prepaid meters and smart meters, and including government. You must be on prepaid, because government, sometimes at both local level and national level, they are the major culprits. And we have just said everybody is on prepaid, and you switch yourself off by not paying in advance. So companies, the utilities that we have, must have cost-reflective tariffs.
Yes, absolutely.
And that will attract investment, because investors want to come and make money, and we encourage them to come and make money. But they cannot make money if the money flow from the users is not flowing. So that is the end user must be made to pay what is correct. But we must also be aware that affordability is important. So we must put our eye on affordability, but at the same time, we must strengthen the utilities so that the private investor who comes in also knows, I will make money. And government is there to ensure that money-making is his business.
Jonas, your last thoughts to the audience?
All right, thanks. What I see is in a competitive integrated energy systems, where the private sector will play a significant role in the electricity sector, and as well as the government. At regional level, I'm foreseeing there will be a strong integration and collaborations when it's come to energy infrastructure. That's really the future I'm looking forward to.
Fantastic. Well, I think that we've had a great discussion. I'm seeing a lot of hopes already in many changes that have already happened, and more changes that we'll see going forward. I see the public and the private stakeholders working together. So there's a lot to come still, but I see only the light going forward. Well, please join me in thanking this great panel, and stay with us for the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Once again, can we give them a big round of applause? Thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it.